Welcome to the Reborn Podcast with Tony Windrose, where we dive deep into personal development, Christianity, leadership, and entrepreneurship. Today, we have a truly inspiring guest, Fernando Bravo. Fernando's journey from Hillsdale College to working with a classical learning test exemplifies a life dedicated to purpose, mentorship, and investing in others. His insights on finding true happiness, building meaningful relationships, and leading with faith are sure to leave a lasting impact. Let's get started and learn more about Fernando's incredible story. Fernando, thank you so much for being here, brother.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Tony.
Hey, first question for you, man. As an entrepreneur, I am not a big college, traditional school guy. Tell me about your decision to go back to school and how it has shaped your purpose in life.
Yeah, definitely. This all started back in 2016. I was a junior in high school and had recently joined a network marketing business. So all throughout my junior year, senior year, I was heavily focused on entrepreneurship. My goal was to retire young, to be able to travel the world, to give conferences to people within that business world. And through one of my first conferences I attended in Portland, the leaders of the business were starting a new organization that had nothing to do with the business, but they were sponsoring this new nonprofit with the mission of educating young adults in the principles and values that define our country through the American story. So they were inviting 40 students to apply to a trip to attend to Washington, D.C., all expenses paid. And for me at the time, even though I didn't understand what the organization was all about, I heard that it was a free trip and I was like, you know what, I got to do it. I got to apply. And so they were offering this opportunity because their network is all around the U.S. So every convention they would go to, they would offer the opportunity to young adults. And I applied and thankfully was one of the young adults that were accepted. So I ended up going to Washington, D.C. and I met all these different people from different states. And I came to realize that this wasn't just an opportunity to go to a new place and meet new people and call it good, but this was more an introduction to the organization itself, to what they were doing and what they wanted to start doing. At the time, most of the students were first-generation Americans because they were kids of people who were within that business network, who were mostly Hispanic. It's a Hispanic organization. So what was appealing to most of us, I'd say, if not all of us, was the opportunity and the ability to truly understand our identity as Americans, because I feel like a lot of first-generation families that are born here, they don't really understand what it means to be an American, because all they hear growing up is this is a land of opportunity. You got to work hard for what you want. You got to find your passion. And this country offers you all of these things, but they don't really understand, why is our country structured the way it is? Why is our government structured the way it is? And yes, I have freedom, but what is my responsibility with that freedom? What does freedom mean in the first place? Freedom is not just the ability to do whatever you want to do. So all these things are all questions that I think we're all born with. And we all find answers to them, somehow as we grow up and as we encounter the world through whatever education system, through our families, through our experiences. So what this organization did for me was it exposed me to a new way of viewing the world through a more conservative lens. And it taught me what the relationship between my political view, my worldview, and my identity as a Christian, how they all intersected and what my responsibility was, but also helping me understand my role as my civic role, and also who I am as a human being and as a Christian. So all these things were inspired me to truly start diving into these big ideas, and specifically through my friendship and as mentors with Bailey and Spencer Emerald, who were the directors of this organization. I got to know them and meet them in person at least once a year. And to me, it was sort of like understanding the final product and of what this kind of education did. They attended Hillsdale College, a liberal arts education. And so I never visited the school, but what it did do was I was able to see the kind of people it produced, people who were able to think, to communicate well, but also to understand a deeper meaning of life and to be able to share that with other people and in the most humble way.
Right.
So to me, it was that inspiration that caused me to reevaluate my priorities at the time. yes, money was still important, but I think at the time what I needed was to be able to keep diving into these truths, knowing that they would impact every aspect of my life moving forward. So to me, it was like an investment, and as someone who didn't believe in college, who, only saw college as an opportunity to gain a lot of information for a career. At the time, I was like, you know what, this is truly an opportunity to grow as a person. So my mindset was all along, I'm not going to go here to, seek a career. I'm going to go here to seek becoming a certain kind of person, knowing that rather than setting a specific goal in life, saying I want to, as I was at the time, saying I wanted to retire, 2 to 5 years, make this much amount of money. Now it was more about, who do I have to be? What kind of a person do I have to be, knowing that God would put the right opportunity in front of me to be able to live up to his plan for my life. And ever since then, that's been the mission.
There's a lot to dissect there, bro. A lot to dissect.
Yeah.
So going from wanting to retire in 2 to 5 years, what does freedom mean? Being a better person rather than having a glorious or glamorous career. Did you mention what the conference name was, or the conference you went to in DC?
So yeah, the DC conference was the first official DC summit for the Windrose project.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, and it's something they'd be doing every year.
Now, when you were talking, one of the things that came to mind is a recent sermon I heard last weekend about being a Christian coming before being in politics. Now, obviously, my belief is that most Christians inherently are conservative because the values are just more similar than being a liberal. But how are you able to understand what it means to be an American, what it means to work hard, what it means to have opportunity, while still placing God before politics?
Yeah, I mean, like you said it, your identity comes first through him. And when he defines who you are as a person, he also defines what you love. And I think that our actions are governed by our passions, which are rooted in our heart, and our heart is rooted in, what do we place as the highest value in our life? So if he is the highest value, politically, it'll also affect the way we see the opportunity and the freedom to be able to work hard for what we want. And I think naturally as Christians, we'll want to be generous with our money. But in order to be generous, you have to be able to have that choice from the government, which is why I think that most people lean conservative, is because conservatism means that you're conserving the values that define our country, the truths that don't change, the truths of what it means to be a person, the fact that, there's two genders, the truths that say all life has value and this country offers us all the opportunity to work hard for what we want and to be rewarded for our work. So I think that it all comes down to, being governed by a certain kind of love and letting that love govern the way you view politics. And then for the most part for Christians, I think that's why they end up being conservatives, because conservatism aligns very well with the ability to have the freedom as a Christian to choose where to serve, how much to give according to your means, and not according to a certain tax that's out of your control and that you don't even know where that money's going.
Right. And I think with tithing specifically, it's easy for people who are blessed financially to give X amount of money, which my personal belief is that when you give time, money, energy, whatever resource you're giving, it should in some sense be uncomfortable. You should be able to feel that you're actually giving, rather than I'm worth $1 billion and I'm giving $5,000, which to most people looks like a monthly income, but to me that's $5,000 out of $1 billion that I have in the bank. So I think that's another big thing. When you were talking, another thing that came to mind is James 2:14. I was looking it up just now. One of the recurring things for me has been faith without works is dead. And so I think that's what you were kind of touching on with being a conservative, is God will provide, but you still have to work. I personally relate a lot to the Simon Peter story, with where he was fishing on Sabbath. Like literally half a dozen of them were fishing and caught not one fish. And He was going to be arrested, possibly executed by the Romans. They saw people on the shore, and they thought it was the Romans coming to arrest him. They're like, man, they're not even waiting for me to go back to them. They're coming to get me. They go back to the shore, and it's Jesus. And he says, "Drop your nets." And I mean, they're in shallow water because they're on the dock, and they drop their nets and they can barely get it up because of how much fish. So he's working. He is new. He's been faithful his whole life, but new to Jesus. And then they combine. Faith without works is dead, but faith. I have another mentor who says faith with works is alive and well, which is not how the Bible says it, but it's kind of the inverse of what the Bible does say.
Right. And then I think works are naturally a fruit of your faith, and I think that's why there's a very deep connection between your ability to work and your ability to have faith and to truly love God, because I think that one follows the other, but it all begins with faith. And then he will naturally give you that gift, and he will allow you to feel that pleasure from doing what's right for working, because as we're called to imitate Christ, what does Christ do? He works. His whole life he worked. And if we can share in that work in whatever we do in life, I mean, that's the ultimate calling. And I think it's also the ultimate form of happiness.
Right. And he worked humbly, which is another big thing. That could be a whole episode in and of itself. But
yeah.
Next question I do have for you before we go into that and go on a 10-hour tangent on the humbleness or humility of Christ.
Sure.
When did you realize, and I think we kind of touched on this a little bit already, but when did you realize that true happiness comes from purpose and not money? It sounds like the defining moment would have been this trip to DC.
It was definitely a moment that initially sowed a seed, but I don't think it was fully realized until a couple years later, because I think at first as an entrepreneur, I saw success and happiness as the ability to, travel, wake up whenever I wanted to, be able to provide for my family. And I do think that's important, but I also don't think that in itself will make you happy. And I was able to experience traveling to other parts of the U.S. through this nonprofit for a couple yearly conferences, or a conference and a retreat. And I found myself constantly thinking that I was thinking about the next trip and the next experience rather than actually enjoying the moment and the present. And I was also sad that it was going to end, because they were usually 2 to 3 day long activities. Right. And so I was like, well, even if I am able to do this full time, I'm always just going to be thinking about the next thing, and then the next meal, the next site to see, the next person to talk to and to meet. And to me, it just felt kind of empty. And so the same thing goes with the money aspect. I started working full time, and then I was able to buy some of the things I've always wanted to have, like a nice guitar, some nice Bluetooth speakers, those little things that growing up, you always say, like, one day I'll be able to buy them. And yeah, they made me happy for a while, but then after it just kind of faded away. So being able to understand that didn't work. And then I think a good conversation that also was impactful to me was talking to someone that was my age, and she had a business and she was very successful in it. And she told us about how she was able to build this really successful business with her brothers for in a period of 2 years. But in the end, even though she had achieved all her financial goals, she talked about how she was still the same insecure person with the same fears, and that she truly didn't feel fulfilled as a person, even though she had reached her financial goals. So to me, that was a clear sign that while finances were important at the time, and they continue to be, I also had to set my goals on things that lasted beyond a materialistic presence and beyond this world, honestly, to be able to invest in God's kingdom and to be able to look ahead, not only in, this life, but in the life ahead as a personal belief, I think has been a very fruitful exercise and has definitely changed the way I view happiness and success.
It sounds like with God having transformed your values from being money to being purpose, was there some anxiety back then that led to that desire for money and power and sleeping in? And obviously as a man, you want to be able to provide for your family. So I think something that is of God, but also doing it ethically and serving his will with his power for his glory.
I think it was more than anything a lack of trust and a security in money rather than a security in God. Because when I went to school, I didn't know how I was going to pay for school, and that forced me to just say, you know what, if this is the opportunity that came up, and I'm trusting in God in the same way that He gave me the opportunity to be accepted into the school. The second time I applied, He would also provide financially, and He did. You know, I still have student loans, but I don't have as many as I would have if I would have the opportunities that He provided for me. I didn't know what they would have been at the time, but I still took the leap of faith. You know, so I think that has been a very, very important aspect in my journey as well, is learning that my trust is ultimately in God, and then He'll provide financially as long as I am walking in obedience in whatever I do. So not that money is bad, you know, it's just that I think sometimes we feel we feel like that is what gives us our security. And I think that's where, because when you lose it, then all of a sudden you lose all security.
Right. And Matthew 6:24, I don't mean to preach, but no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve, and it specifically says you cannot serve both God and money. It doesn't say whatever other idols, power, fame, or it says money specifically. So I think that's definitely a temptation that many people have, both people who have an abundance and people who do not. I do want to touch on what you had mentioned with the young woman having the fears and the insecurity even after achieving her financial goals. I would say I definitely can relate to that. Just a few months ago, I kind of shifted from having my identity in being an entrepreneur rather than being in Christ. And after that shift, I began feeling a lot more secure and faithful and confident and joyful and so on. And I think the most pressing thing for me is grateful. I was talking with a brother last night about what's like the one word. I asked him, what's the one word you think of when you think of Christ? And for me, it was grateful, because He's transformed my life. I can make X dollars, whatever I want to make, and still feel unfulfilled, because money, it doesn't bring, people say it doesn't bring happiness. I think in some sense it does bring freedom. It definitely allows you to feel a bit more relieved. I mean, I used to pull up to the gas station and I would have anxiety pulling up to the gas station because I could barely afford to pay for gas. So that, you know, just even like small stuff like that is very, very helpful and relieving. But I also understand that I'm borrowing the money from Christ. It's not mine. It's His that He's given me to steward. So I can definitely personally relate to that.
And the same applies to your time.
Yeah, that's another thing I think is, as an entrepreneur, your time is more valuable than your money, and so it can be much easier to say, oh, I don't have the time, but I'll give this amount of money. So I don't want to self-glorify, or there's a better word for that, but I try to do my best to give both time and money, both like I serve in some, you know, youth ministries that I feel purpose and driven towards, but I also give financially. And that, I think that balance of not only giving time or not only giving money, if you're abundant most people are either abundant in time or abundant in money. If you're abundant in money, it's almost better for you to give more time, and vice versa. If you're abundant in time, give more money.
Right.
Making it uncomfortable in a sense.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that's been huge for me is mentorships, masterminds I've gone to, individual mentors I've had. On our conversation, we were just talking offline. You had mentioned having better relationships with your mentors while you're in school. Good questions there. How did these relationships impact your personal and professional growth, as well as how have you navigated your personal and professional growth without having as much access to these mentors after school?
Yeah, so to answer the first question, the ability to find people who are further ahead of you in life in certain aspects, and then to connect with them was a very valuable experience for me as a student, because one of my biggest goals as a student and as a Christian was to grow in character and to grow in my faith. So I was able to connect with the campus chaplain and to be able to have a one-on-one with him every week. And I think the biggest fruit of that was both the accountability, the being able to set goals and then have someone that I was accountable to, but also being able to see what does it actually look like to have a good friendship and to be a good friend. And I think that to learn to be a good friend, you have to have a good friend that's willing to teach you, because we can all think that to be a good friend means X, but at the end of the day, if you haven't experienced it, you won't know how to do it, and it won't come from a genuine place. So specifically with my relationship and my faith with Christ, as I was able to grow in him and in his love, that also impacted how my other relationships and friendships, both in college and outside of college, with my family, with old friends. And I was able to take this perspective of, I'm not having this conversation with you because I want something from you, but it's more, I have a certain abundance with God and what he's doing in my life, and I want to be able to share that with you. And we both relate to the same creator, so we are sharing in our love of him in the same way that a couple friends get together through a love of sports, through a love of fishing, through a love of a certain hobby. I think as Christians, the healthiest way to view our friendships is in the mutual love that we have for Christ. So by sharing in that love, that's how we relate to each other. And so that's how I was able to be more impactful as a person, but these friendships were mainly rooted in Christ and then his love. And that has also affected the way I see other people, but also the philosophy and mentality I have when I meet someone new. And it's not as self-centered or self-interested as it used to be at the time. And it is something, it's easier said than done, and then I think sometimes there is a temptation to say, what can this guy give me, or what opportunity can I get from this relationship or friendship? But if you have that constant reminder and you're constantly growing in Christ, he'll naturally govern your loves, and he'll naturally place the important ones on top so that you can avoid these temptations or overcome them. And to answer your second question about how I've navigated life after college with mentorships and all that, to be honest, it is something I'm still working on. I've reached out to people who I was in contact with in the past throughout school, and I've been able to connect with a couple of them. And so I want to be able to be more consistent and more disciplined with those conversations, even though they won't be in person anymore. I still see the value in having those people that already know me and have invested so much into me. And knowing that the investment doesn't end with me, but the investment continues with me. So, and it's also been a struggle since I am still figuring out where I'm going to live long term, to be able to invest in a certain local mentorship relationship has been tricky. But as soon as I do figure out what that's going to look like, I'll definitely start with the church, looking at guys I admire and respect, and being willing to learn from them, and then to see how our friendship can be mutually beneficial, and I think the ability to, I think a common question always arises with friendships and mentorship relationships, especially in the Christian world, is, how do I know if this is fruitful? How do I know if this is actually a good friendship? Because sometimes one of the two feel like they're not growing as much, or they just don't see the fruit. And I think the best way to determine this is if at least one of you is growing in his faith and in his love of Christ, then the friendship should continue. And I think if at least one is growing, the other one is also growing consequently. But, I think it's a fair assessment, because it's not determined by how much fun am I having, or how much am I learning, but it's at least one of us growing in this faith. And if that's the case, great, continue.
Right. Because I think that's important. If at least one is growing in faith and it's a good friendship, rather than having it as fun. Because I think there's definitely a time for fun, but there's also time for learning and serious discipleship. So, for example, where we met at Forge Leadership Summit, we go through the serious stuff, the leadership development, the political stuff during the day. At night, we're singing songs, we're dancing, having fun on the rooftop, and it's a good time. But throughout that whole time, both when it's more serious and when it's more, let loose a little bit, we're still developing our faith and our leadership and our fellowship. And so it's not a matter of, maybe we think the rooftop is more fun. Maybe some people think that, being in the political sphere is more fun. That's not really my arena, but I'm sure there are people that prefer that over dancing and whatnot. So that, and then I love that quote you said with mentors. Investment does not end with me; it continues with me, passing it down to the next generations. And I know you actually pass it down to a lot of people who even are our age as well. So not even necessarily the next generations, but our generation. How can we be intentional I think it does become a habit, like you mentioned in the beginning. How can we be intentional in, first and foremost, being brothers and sisters in Christ rather than being worldly and caring about what we can get from people?
It all starts with aligning your loves the right way, and then that all starts with a genuine relationship with Christ. Morning devotionals, afternoon prayers, evening devotionals, all these things, spending time with him and being faithful that he's going to do what he wants to do according to his time with that time that you set. Not wanting to expect any sort of supernatural feeling or power or ability to, see the future as a consequence, but rather to see it as a consistent exercise that will take time, but sooner or later, you're going to be able to see and to look back on your life and to say, wow, I'm not annoyed by the same things anymore. Or I have a certain kind of love for people that I didn't used to have.
Yeah.
Or I genuinely want to meet and get to know this person. And, I don't really care about what they're going to do for me, but I genuinely just want to value them as people. And this all comes with a personal relationship with Christ.
Yeah.
So I think that's how it's not a matter of setting a certain rule for yourself and telling yourself, what, from now on, I'm going to start seeing people as God's children and I'm going to invest with them. Yes, that's important. But I think it genuinely begins with the heart, because everything else will follow. Your way of communicating, choosing what to say, what not to say, when to say it, all these things,
Right.
The people who you actually talk to, these will all naturally be affected as soon as you start affecting the inner self, which is, the heart, through your friendship with Christ.
I think in some cases it can actually become worse if you are thinking about exactly what I want to say, exactly how I want to say it, and so on, because then it just becomes unreal. Like, it's not you, it's not authentic.
Right.
I do want to bring up a tangible example of what you were just talking about. I had two brothers in Christ who really, or have two brothers in Christ who really spoke into me before I was Christian. I've spoken about this on the podcast a couple of times, and we might have spoken about it as well. They spoke into me with a lot of conviction. And honestly, like I said before, I thought they were really corny in the beginning, but they spoke into me with a lot of conviction about Christ. And ultimately, that was a big, big catalyst towards my coming to Christ. And recently, from Forge, somehow, I don't know how it got in my head, but I deemed a new catchphrase, which is with his power for, his will with his power for his glory.
Yeah.
And I called my friend, and one of the friends who I was talking about, one of the two people, and he said, you should put that on a shirt. I want to put it on a Shopify, Printify, whatever. And I'm like, man, this is not my thing. I'm a people person. I like talking to people, sales, marketing. I have the business acumen. I have some money I can invest, but like that sitting at a screen is not my thing. And funny enough, he is in the industry. He is a data analyst, which I'm definitely not a numbers guy. I joke one of my business coaches all the time. We're always going over KPIs, Excel spreadsheets. And I'm like, man, I got to go get my ibuprofen. when I meet with you, because I'm looking at all these numbers, and again, that's not my thing. My thing is talking to people.
Yeah.
But all this to say, he came into my life. He was a big a part of me coming to Christ, and now we're going to be starting a apparel company together. No idea when we first met that was going to happen. We had an hour plus conversation again that brought me ultimately to Christ, and just happens to be by God's will that we have opposite skill traits. He already has experience. I have money. He has time. I have opposites. Like, it all actually works out, and it's just amazing that we definitely did not come into the relationship knowing anything about that. My business that I currently run was non-existent back then, and so God definitely works in very interesting ways sometimes, and very grateful for that. So even and that's not to tell people, hey, you want to build a relationship, because God might work in an interesting way, but He might. You never know. So, but still building relationships with authenticity.
Right. And then one thing always leads to another, like you said.
Yeah.
No, you don't want to figure out the whole roadmap, because then it would be boring. It's like watching the end of the movie. Then what's the point of watching the start?
Right.
You know, and then having that trust that He's going to take care of it. And then all your job is to move and to make the next best decision according to the wisdom and knowledge you have. I mean, that's all you can do.
So I'm gonna push back on that a little bit. I heard a speech, not really a sermon, a speech in a men's group a few months ago, beginning of the year, February or something. And the guy said, God will show you the end. He will show you where you will be, who you will become, but He won't show you all the steps there, because that's where your faith comes into play, step by step. Yep. So you follow His discernment, His will, with His power for His glory, and He will get you to that vision that He's shown you. So pushing back on that a little bit about showing you the end, I think I kind of have an idea of what my vision for my life is, of what.
No, I can get behind that. In terms of, you know what that looks like as a person, and then you know that it is within your control to become that kind of person. Although circumstantially, you know what career you'll have, what business you'll end up with, all these things are still to be decided. But the things that we do know for certain are the ones that we can set as the goal, but also will become the means to the other things. So I can definitely get behind that.
Right. I think that's for sure. Like, right now I'm going to have a real estate business, and I'm going to have a new apparel business. I know I want to go into private equity, own, a big portfolio of businesses. I don't know exactly what sort of businesses. Maybe there'll be HVAC, window, whatever, businesses correlate with real estate. Maybe it'll be something else. I really can't say at this point. So, but I trust that God is going to unveil that plan. Hopefully, like I said, within the next 3 to 5 years. It might be next 30 to 50. So we'll see how God's plan works that out. But we were mentioning earlier, again, the investment does not end with me. It continues with me. How do you guide young adults in building a worldview that balances goal setting, as we were talking about before, goal setting in the future, with being present today, here and now?
That is something, going back to one of the other questions where you talked about happiness and purpose, the way I saw these mentors, Spencer and Bailey, enjoy the present was truly also a deciding factor of me wanting to learn a lot of the things that they learned, and then to view life that same way. And so when you're able to see life and to see the mundane, and to truly take joy from it, take joy from making yourself a meal, take joy from cleaning the dishes, you take joy from going to sleep at an adequate time. As you're able to do that and to see the fruits, then you're also a walking testimony of that philosophy, and now you're able to pass it on to other people. So now the question is, how do I teach someone something that has helped me, and how do I spark that curiosity? Well, I really stand behind the phrase that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And you show people that you care about them by adding value to their lives. And how do you add value? I think it all starts with listening. It doesn't start with proving yourself or proving your character. Through whatever interaction you have, your character is going to be proven.
Right.
But they will truly see that you care about them and you care about who they are as people when you start asking questions and when you listen to them. And as people talk about themselves, you listen, you're able to see who they are as people. You're able to see a deeper side of their humanity that most people aren't willing to see because they're not willing to ask the questions and to spend that time. Then they'll start asking you questions. Oh, how do you go about this? Or I noticed this in you. Can you tell me more about the things that have helped you overcome a certain fear, a certain struggle to build a certain habit? So I think that's where it all starts, is knowing that people will come to respect you over time because your character will naturally, you'll naturally emanate who you are, regardless of however you start. If you start genuine, it's going to continue genuine. If you start fake, then they're going to see past that over time. And once they do, get to know you and you get to know them, I think it naturally just works out so that they become curious in who you are and then they want to learn from you. And then you're able to teach them things that you already know that they work because they've already worked in your life. And if they haven't, then, what are you going to teach them?
Right. I think also asking questions allows you to foster and build and maintain genuine relationships, whereas I think a lot of people who are not aware love to talk about themselves. And it's because that's easy. I know exactly what I did yesterday. Well, not really. I don't know what I had for lunch this morning or breakfast this morning, to be honest with you. But it's easier to talk about myself. Sometimes for people, it's like I'm asking it. I think what I'm trying to say is another thing I would touch on is asking questions genuinely wanting to get to know people, genuinely wanting to build relationships, and then seeing them unveil, as opposed to just talking about, this is me, this is what I've done, why I'm here, etc. Another thing, I don't think you said this exactly, but taking joy from humility, making yourself a meal, cleaning, sleeping. As high achievers, we are often told by society we need to work, and maximize our time and never do anything like make yourself a meal, just order DoorDash or whatever. And reminds me of a mentor. I was recently at his house and I saw him. Could easily afford to hire a maid, but I saw him washing dishes.
Right.
And my train of thought was, when I have a family, I'm gonna, just because I want to have several children, I'm just gonna hire maids for all that stuff. But then seeing him washing dishes, and then also thinking about, I used to do some DoorDash and whatnot myself. I remember making a delivery and I opened a door, they opened a door. I didn't barge into their room. They opened a door and I saw inside, and it was like a Thursday afternoon, and there was there's a sun, 2 p.m., out of shape, chips on his lap, and playing video games, and but that kind of showed me I could hire service providers and all that, but that might be how my children turn out, versus I know how my mentor's children have turned out, and he's washing dishes, and Jesus washed feet.
Right.
I think whenever we start getting an ego, all we have to think about is Jesus washed feet.
Yeah.
That's powerful stuff.
Right. And the way Jesus responded to people was through questions and parables. Right. He never gave up straight up answers. And to answer your question, your specific question, because I don't think I actually addressed how I invest in other young adults and to willingness and ability to view the balance between goal setting and being present. I think it starts with, as we're talking about how we actually gain their influence by showing genuine interest and genuine care and humility. It starts with leading the way. When you lead the way and you show them how you live your life, they'll naturally follow along. And like I said, ask you questions and be willing to learn from you. And when it comes to goal setting specifically, as you lead the way and as you show them the things that govern your life, the things that you love and the things that drive your passions, your interests, then they will also begin to ask themselves and reevaluate, what is it that is governing me? And what is it that I want to be governing me? And in that way, as they place that love in the highest place where it belongs, their goals will naturally align with that love. And so you don't necessarily, I don't think there's a perfect goal setting technique. There's not a perfect accountability structure to where you can say, oh, you follow these 3 steps and then you will succeed. It's like, no, it starts with, first of all, let's ask ourselves, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? Is that the right reason? And if it is, then whatever technique or structure or method you use to set goals will work. But the first thing is not knowing how to set a goal and how to balance that with being present. The first thing starts with internal growth and realization of the things that are worthwhile to pursue and the things that are worthwhile to love, and like the present itself, and I think naturally the goals will align and follow with those ideals.
You have transitioned from a period of being an entrepreneur and having some success as an entrepreneur. And I'm sure when you had that entrepreneurial success, you led people who were inspired by what you were doing to now being a leader in what you're currently doing. How has your faith and relationship with God influenced your leadership style and adapted it and your approach to helping others?
Yeah, if I could summarize it, I'd say genuine leadership requires genuine love, and genuine love requires a genuine source, which for me as a Christian is Christ. And so as I love him, I know how to love others well, but it's not necessarily that I have that in mind. It's more just it naturally occurs. And so learning from him, learning to imitate him, like, what we were talking about with the work aspect and the humility aspect, all these things have been contributing factors in understanding that I've been placed in a certain opportunity, as glamorous or not as it is, to serve God. And because of that, it's worthwhile. It's worthwhile for me to perform it to my best ability. But it is also worthwhile to understand that all glory goes to him in the same way that all criticism goes to him, because you're basically giving everything to him. When you act and you start to be successful in a certain area, people will naturally criticize you and people will naturally see you because, you're doing something different. And I think as you learn to give God the glory and you also learn to give him the criticism, then it doesn't fall on you, but it falls on him, and he also takes all the credit. So you see yourself as a vessel for him to do his work. And in that sense, that is what gives you a certain sense of purpose, but also it gives you the ability to not desire credit when you do certain things that other people get credit for. You're happy that other people are getting recognized when you might not be recognized, because you're understanding that the bigger goal is being accomplished, and that is all your focus should be on the mission, and not necessarily in your personal status being elevated by whatever you do, or your personal financial or monetary success. Like, no, man, this is all irrelevant when you understand that God has placed you somewhere to be effective for his glory and his kingdom.
Do you ever still have the worldly desires creep in with financial or anything else of the world as opposed to of the kingdom? And how do you combat those thoughts?
I do. And, it is also a recurring struggle. And then I think the first thing I do is to be thankful for that experience, because it teaches me that as much as I know, as much as I've learned, I still have a ton of room to grow in because of the fact that I'm experiencing that. And so I think there are opportunities for God to say, hey, you're not all that great. You're not all that smart. And if you've had any success, it's not because of you or your greatness, but it's because of me and the gifts that I've given you. So for me, I always take it as an opportunity to reevaluate my own ability to find strength in God and not necessarily in myself. And so it's always a constant reminder of like, wow, this is tough. And oh, wait, yeah, it's tough because I'm not relying on God. And he's showing me that I can't truly do it for myself. So when I switched to that mindset, and I'm grateful for that experience, that helps me to realign my views with God's purpose and not focus as much on, what do I want in the moment.
What do you find most rewarding about investing in other people's growth and development?
The fact that the fruits of that investment are eternal. And it's a different feeling when you hear about how you impacted someone that maybe you didn't even know you impacted them. And to be able to hear stories about people being inspired by your own story. And that's where you're able to learn to give the credit to God and to say, wow, I experienced all these things because, yeah, they helped me grow as a person, but guess what? They also helped you relate to other people. And then so the difficulties we experience in life and in hardships, as we become better people, as we grow in our faith, God uses all these experiences to help you relate to other people as well. And then they see themselves in your story. So I think that's been one of the most rewarding aspects, is knowing that He's able to turn all of this negativity and all of my failures into lessons that I haven't only benefited from, but also other people. And it's really cool to see how other people are impacted by those lessons. Whether you realize it or not, a lot of people have been impacted by your own story. And even if they haven't told you, it's something, it is a truth to keep in mind, because I've had multiple experiences where people have come to me 2-3 years later after I had decided to go back to school, and they said, hey, Fernando, remember that conversation we had, or remember you sharing your story, and that was truly a moment for me to reevaluate what was important in my life, and then for me to want to continue and pursue an education that would help me become a better person. And so to me, those experiences are worthwhile, and they're an opportunity to see God's investment and then the fruits of His investment in yourself, because as they start affecting other people, that's transcending you, and it's going beyond your own benefit, but you're able to see how He's truly using you as a means to build His kingdom.
Being thankful for what others, especially in the moment, may objectively see as bad things, which can definitely be difficult. I know some people who have recently lost loved ones that, were very, very young. I was journaling the other day on mental health, on, my mental health journey growing up. But I can tangibly see why I've been through that journey, and why other people, some of it is inexplicable, but down the line, we see that it was His will, and how it starts to all unfold in a good manner that we wouldn't have had if we didn't have those things that were objectively bad by the world, or called by the world. So with that said, what was the biggest challenge you faced during your transition from college with the mentors community to working, especially virtually working, for the classical learning test, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, Hillsdale College is one of those institutions that it's truly a bubble, because it's out there in the middle of nowhere, about an hour and a half from Detroit. And for me, coming from a bigger city, and I live like 20 minutes away from Portland, Oregon, the slogan for Portland has always been keep Portland weird. And in the past, that weirdness was, people being quirky and being, themselves. And now that weirdness has turned into people walking around the streets with, a leash around their necks. And then that's something that I've seen. I saw during a summer break a couple of years ago. And then that weirdness has become, that I'm not even going to go into it. You already know what I'm referring to. Hillsdale College is blessed to be a community of people who share similar ideas and values, yet still they're all able to debate with each other about things that they disagree with theologically or philosophically. So it's a very vibrant environment in that sense. And to me, it was definitely a place that was comforting. And it was challenging, but also comforting because I knew that I was surrounded by people that loved Christ, regardless of our disagreements in other areas. And so that came with mentors, that came with deep friendships, that came with deep experiences, both in church, worship, to be able to have music nights where we would get together and just jam out and then sing songs around the campfire. Like all these experiences that I had were very, very much experiences that defined me as a person, and that gave me an ability to enjoy the moment as we're talking about, and to create and to build all these habits. And so what I've realized since I've been out of college is that a lot of my identity at the time revolved around my connection to the institution, to school. And I was applying for a job after school with this nonprofit, and all my hopes were in this position, and I was like, wow, this is all making sense. God has truly taken me through this journey of entrepreneurship to education to now being able to invest in other people through this nonprofit. And in the end, it didn't end up working out. And so what I've realized is that part of how I see God working in all of this in my life is in that he's teaching me to understand my identity outside of a particular group of people, outside of an identity as a college student or a position or a certain title, but he's truly making me ask myself, who am I as a person? What is it that defines me? And in this case, it's truly starting to be a relationship with Christ. And while he was always present throughout this journey, I think there was always a temptation to also let a certain position within my extracurricular involvement, or even as a student, to be the one that defined me. And it would have been a temptation with a specific role with the nonprofit. So that has been one of the most difficult things, is to be pulled away from an environment that was growing me as a person spiritually, with friends, socially. And then now I'm in this place where, I'm not as accountable as I was to my mentors because I'm not in contact to them as frequently. And right. So I've had to relearn these habits that I was able to cultivate throughout the last 2.5 years. And I've had to reapply them and to reevaluate my motives. And now it's not just a motive of, oh, I told someone I was going to do something and I have to do it, or I have an essay coming up tomorrow and I'm going to be disciplined to go to sleep early. But now it's, I am doing all these things because God is calling me to be a certain kind of person. He's calling me to obey. And so I'm learning to realign my lifestyle around that idea, and not just in a commitment with a person or a responsibility with a class or an organization. And so that has been, it's been difficult. It hasn't been easy at all. But thankfully this week, I find myself having more time when I work a job, or when I'm committed to things throughout the day, than having, let's say, a free day and saying, oh, I have so much time this day, I'm going to do all the little to-do lists. Like for me, it just doesn't work like that. For me, I've actually found myself having more time working a full-time job because I've had to structure my day accordingly. And it's also fun to check off boxes. I'm a very I love checklists, so any opportunity to make a checklist, I take advantage of, and it's been great in that sense, but I think the most difficult transition was having faith that God was going to provide an alternate opportunity, and knowing that all of my spiritual growth, development, and habits had to revolve around him and not around a specific organization or responsibility. So thankfully, this specific organization, it's great. They've been great with following up with me and educating me in the role itself. But I also really see their humanity, and the classical learning test, their mission is to reconnect knowledge and virtue by providing meaningful assessments and connections to seekers of truth, goodness, and beauty. And so this very much aligns with my education in terms of the things that I see in life that are worthwhile. And I think to all of us, regardless of your faith, we all seek goodness, truth, and beauty in our lives. Mm-hmm. And these transcendental virtues are what give us a sense of purpose, a sense of gratitude, a sense of happiness. And so to be able to work for an organization that has that values people, that values passion, that values the humanity more than anything of people, I think it's been a big blessing. And even though the meetings are virtual, I really do. And I have enjoyed conversations with a lot of my coworkers. So, God has provided and he's going to continue to provide. And it was also a good test of saying like, wow, even though I thought that he had a certain plan for me, that wasn't the case. But I trusted him and he was able to provide. But actually, when we were out there in Nashville is when I interviewed and that same week they offered me the job. So it's pretty cool to see.
Yeah. Amen. I had one thing just repeating in my head while you were talking. You said Hillsdale is a bubble, and you were talking about people on leashes, which is certainly interesting. Welcome back.
I can't make this stuff up, bro. Yeah. I know.
Welcome to reality, which is an insane reality that you would never even think you would see in a fantasy movie, but
right.
It is reality. Luckily I've never actually seen it in person, so I'm blessed in that way. But welcome back to the real world, brother.
It's a different world, man. I was at Walmart yesterday, and just to get a pair of socks, you have to press a button for someone to come and open the case, and it's insane. Yeah, they have everything locked down because of the amount of theft.
Oh wow.
And yesterday my parents were driving back from Costco, and there were a bunch of paramedics and police cars outside of a hospital. Apparently someone was driving recklessly and they had to put the guy down. So it's a crazy world, man. Like it's not the same. It was already crazy enough. And then sadly, it just comes down to people's beliefs and values and how they've manifested politically as well.
Beginning of our
that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah. There's a lot of conversations in this conversation that could become full week-long conference topics, including what I'm actually about to ask. We were talking about the beginning of the conversation. We were talking about your identity as Americans and what freedom means. Offline, we talked about how you define freedom, and you said you define freedom as the ability to choose to do the right thing. Can you elaborate on how this principle guides your decisions and actions?
Yeah. I think it was Plato that said that the purpose of education was to learn to love what one ought to love and to hate what one ought to hate. And so this is all talking about a transformation of the heart. And in life, we all know the things we should do according to the goals we have, but the challenge is in actually doing them.
Right.
And so we realize that even though we have free will, oftentimes we're actually more slaves to our passions than we are free to act on the things that we know we should act on. So as we learn to, this all goes back to loving what you ought to love, as Plato says, and for Christians, it's loving God. And as you love God, your will aligns with his will. You're able to choose to act on what's right, not because of the information that you learn, but because of his transformation of your heart. So there is a certain logical aspect, to you saying, oh, if I go to sleep late, I'm going to be tired out throughout the day tomorrow. And that kind of thought process does influence your actions. But I think a bigger influence is truly, what is that guiding force behind your actions? And that is, what are you truly passionate about, which is answered by what do you love?
Right.
So that's how I think that freedom comes into play in all of this, is that we're not truly free, because if we were truly free, we'd be able to logically say on paper, I want to do all these things and actually do them. But, none of us have that ability. And if we do, then it's because we've been able to transform our loves and our passions according to the right things. So I always like the analogy of someone who can play an instrument very well, a musician. You have a piano in front of someone who can't play it at all. They can just bang on the keys and make a lot of noise. They can freely choose what keys to press, but they're not going to make a melody. And someone who has studied music, someone who has gone through the rigorous process of learning how melodies work, learning scales, learning how to read notes, They're people who are able to freely play how the instrument is supposed to be played. So in the same way that a musician is truly free to play the instrument according to its nature, we as human beings become truly free to live lives according to our nature when we align our purpose and our love according to God's will.
So we are in a prison built by our own desires, loves, passions being misguided.
Pretty much, yeah.
It's powerful.
Yeah.
I think we used
it's
to live in a
swallow, but I think, I mean,
yeah.
It makes sense to me at least. And historically, it's been an ongoing conversation.
And I think there's a lot of truth to that. The first thing you said was, we know what we need to do, but we don't do them. I think we used to live in a world, pre-internet, that there was a lack of information. Since the internet, we have all the information we need to accomplish anything we need or want. The thing is, there's so much information. There's almost too much information that we don't take action because we don't have the faith that, for example, I can go look up right now how to start a business and study it my entire life and never actually start a business because I don't have the faith that it's actually going to work for me. I'm a special snowflake, so it's not going to work for me. So I think, lack of taking action, or misguided passions. One of my daily prayers is, let my thoughts, deeds, and words be good and pleasing to the Lord, and do His will with His power for His glory, and discernment. And what is the last one? I just added one in this couple weeks ago. Indifference. Praying anything that it's not His will to be indifferent to it. Yeah. And that God answers prayers. He shows you the clarity of what you should be focused on, what you should love, what you should be passionate about, and so on. So that's another topic that could be all day or all week. But a couple last things for you. How did your experiences at Hillsdale and your involvement, I know you said just for a short time, with the Windrose, contribute to developing your philosophy on leadership and life?
Yeah, I've talked a lot about the internal growth and then the internal guiding force behind my decisions. But more specifically, on a more general basis, being able to go to a place that challenges you to think, and that challenges you to write essays and to communicate your thoughts on paper. And then I also had the opportunity to be a part of organizations within the campus that were a volunteer organization called A Few Good Men, where we would lead student groups of volunteers, and we would volunteer throughout the week helping people with their basic needs like landscaping or painting, snow removal. And so all these experiences gave me practical insights in terms of how to lead people, and also asking myself, what is my role here as a leader, and my role more than anything was to help the organization grow. But it all started with really loving to learn the people. So my experiences at the college and in Windrose all taught me that leadership is universal, and then leadership is service, leadership is influence, and all these things are not going to be genuine unless your love for those people is genuine. And so it all comes back to the faith and to the relationship with Christ, and then to know that to effectively understand the mission and to execute it, to do what you should do, to love people the right way, it all starts with having a relationship with Christ. And so these experiences gave me, I think, being able to say yes to things that were uncomfortable, simple things like working at a contact center with a group of students that were also in the room, and being scared of the first 10 phone calls that I had. Yeah. Because the room was all quiet. It was just me saying, thank you for calling Hillsdale College. My name is Fernando. I'm a student here. How can I help you? Knowing that I didn't really know how to help them,
Yeah.
So little things like that, also public speaking, reading scripture on a Sunday in front of the whole church. These were challenges that to me were terrifying. But I said yes to them, and I said yes to them because I knew that the pain of regret looking back of not doing it would be greater than the temporary discomfort. But I also said yes to them because I knew that God was placing all these opportunities for me to learn different aspects that are important to leadership and to serving, like public speaking, like learning to organize groups, like learning to organize a schedule, and then all these practical things that align with the heart of leadership, which is, in my opinion, service and influence.
Good, bro. It's good. So I have one question I always ask every single guest that comes on, and that is, if you could only give one piece of advice, what is the best piece of advice you would give to young leaders or leaders in general who are too focused on future goals and not present? What's the one piece of advice you would give leaders?
I think I would say keep your goals. Don't lose your ability to set goals, but rechannel your goals to a purpose and a mission that's worthwhile and that goes and transcends beyond yourself. And so I would advise any entrepreneur that's listening to this to truly ask yourself, why is it that I'm doing what I'm doing? If it's the right reason, continue. And if it's not, then learn to realign your purpose with a bigger mission of serving God. And I've seen how your role and your involvement with this particular business endeavor is serving His kingdom is ultimately our highest calling. So I don't think goal setting is bad. Goals are great, and goals are essential to accomplish whatever it is we want to accomplish. So the question is, what is it that we should accomplish, and how should we set our goals accordingly?
How can we know whether we are pursuing a worthwhile mission? Is it just kind of an internal feeling? Is there something more tangible that we can check boxes, like you were saying earlier?
Right.
How can we know if we are pursuing a worthwhile mission?
If you ask yourself at the end of the day, is what I'm doing gonna bring glory to Christ? Is my conversation with this person gonna glorify Christ? Is the amount of money we're making a consequence of us being able to add value to society? And I'm not saying that everyone should, build a church, because the church isn't the only way to impact humanity. Creating opportunities for people to make a living and to make one that is honorable and that is truly a consequence of them actually investing in and offering something beneficial to society. The entrepreneurship is good, and it's essential to a flourishing society. So understanding what your role is within that bigger mission, and asking yourself, am I glorifying Christ through what I'm doing, through the decisions I'm making, or am I glorifying myself and bringing in and prioritizing my own interests? So I think that's a basic question that you can ask yourself, and in a bigger view of what you're doing, but also on a more micro perspective in terms of your daily conversations, interactions, and the way you spend your time.
Doing His will as opposed to doing your own, or the will of peer pressure puts you into.
Exactly.
I also have a theme of wrapping up each episode with some rapid fire questions. We have a few questions here. These are pretty quick answers. Sometimes I tell people one sentence, sometimes it hasn't really worked out too well, so I will just go through these real quick. No guideline, but quick.
Sure.
One sentence, if possible. What is your favorite class at Hillsdale?
Philosophy of education.
This is a tough one. Early morning prayers or late night reflections?
Both.
Yeah.
I can't choose one over the other. I think
right.
The morning is probably more important because it's how you start your day. But the late night reflections are always super important as well, because it's gonna set the way you go to sleep and also how you're gonna wake up the next day. So
right.
Yeah, but if I could only choose one, I'd probably say morning.
Morning. Okay.
Yeah.
One word your mentors would use to describe you?
Tenacious.
Most inspiring mentor you had in school, and why were they the most inspiring?
I'd say the campus chaplain, Father Adam, and he was the most inspiring because he showed me what a Christ-centered relationship is supposed to look like, and how I should be able to grow and invest in my own faith, but also knowing that my investment in myself is going to be something that God uses for his glory and for me to invest in other people as well. So, great guy. And then a funny dude as well, despite how much he knows about the Bible and his faith, he was humble, and then he was very, very much willing to be vulnerable as well. And then so I got to know him really well, and it was just a great experience.
Amen.
And I'm still in contact with him.
Good.
Yeah.
Favorite spots on campus to reflect and find peace?
The chapel. Yeah, Christ Chapel. They built it there in 2019, and so it's a very new building with a more classical structure. Like the chapels in Oxford. It has that same kind of architecture, and so it's just a place where I was able to reflect, to do a little devotional every now and then, to do a prayer, and it was just great.
Biggest challenge when transitioning from college to working at the classical learning test?
Biggest challenge was learning to reprioritize, redefine my priorities in life, and then to build habits that revolved around God and that were mainly governed by him and not by a specific person, relationship, or organization.
Most impactful Bible verse or spiritual saying you live by?
I've had one lately this week that I've been reflecting on a lot, and it's rejoice in hope, be patient in suffering, and persevere in prayer. Romans 12:12, and that just, to me, it summarizes the Christian walk, and it's a helpful reminder for daily struggles, but also learning to see the big picture and why is it that we're doing all this.
Romans 12:12, rejoice in hope, be patient. You said be patient in tribulation?
Be patient in suffering.
In suffering?
Yeah.
Be constant in prayer. Okay, I love that.
Yeah.
What is your top tip for maintaining discipline?
Maintain a love for the things you ought to love. And if you don't have it, then ask for it.
Yeah.
Ask for God to give you that love, to give you a desire to love what you ought to love. I think that's also where it starts. It's not just learning to love, but it's truly asking for it. Because I think it's a gift from God.
Right.
To start to love the things that you ought to love. So
it's easy to love the worldly as opposed to the godly or the kingdom before empire.
Right.
But many people fall into the empire mindset. So I feel like this was kind of getting it kind of easy at this point. But if you could have a heart to heart with any historical figure of faith, who would it be?
I'd say Saint Stephen. He was the first Christian martyr in Acts. And I was a part of a group on campus called the Society of Saint Stephen. So we practiced spiritual disciplines that revolved around his ideals. And I mean, I just want to get to know the guy because he was the first person willing to sacrifice himself for the gospel.
That is what I thought you were going to say. I thought this was going to be a for sure answer. I thought you were definitely going to say Jesus.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's implied, right? That's implied.
Yeah.
But hey, I already know Jesus. I talk to him every day. So how about that?
Amen. There we go. Yeah. And you'll talk to Saint Stephen when we go to heaven.
Exactly.
So
yeah,
there we go. Now one last question. I know kind of asked a similar question. What is one piece of advice you would give to the audience in general from different parts of life, different ages, genders, and races, professions, so on? Maybe even some who are not Christian.
Yeah. I would say to reevaluate, why you're doing what you're doing. And it's really easy for me as a Christian to say, I'm doing everything to build God's kingdom. And if that's the case for you, then every relationship, every conversation, every interaction you have, that is the measure, is how am I glorifying God through this? And outside of faith, I would say that you already have faith in something and in someone. And if tomorrow that thing disappeared, how would that impact you as a person? And to start, is it a possibility for that thing to one day not be there? And if it is, then maybe it's time to reevaluate, what is your highest value? What is your highest priority? And the answer to that can be Christ. It can be something else, but I don't think there's many other things that would offer you the same security, the same kind of security that we as Christians have in Christ, a belief in God. So I think that everyone already has faith in something, and we all have, our happiness is dependent on that thing. So just ensure that whatever that thing is something that can withstand time, can withstand any hardship, can withstand this life itself. And then to me, that is Christ. And if it's not to you, then ask yourself, what is that thing?
And I think you said you don't think there's anything as powerful. There is nothing else that is eternal.
Right.
Christ. So inherently, that means there is nothing as powerful. But thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Reborn Podcast with Tony Windrose. Special thanks to our guest, Fernando. Bravo, brother. I love your name. Bravo. I can say that. Bravo. I love
I got lucky.
For sure. People can spell your name and say it and enjoy saying it. People can't do either for my last name. So, a special thanks to our guest, Fernando Bravo, for sharing his journey and wisdom with us. If you enjoyed this conversation, I would be so grateful if you could just subscribe. And if you're feeling extra generous, share this episode with a friend who can also take value. You know what they say, your network is your net worth. Be a valuable part of someone's network. Stay connected with us on social media. Fernando, where can I find you online? Where can I connect?
I'm on Instagram, Bravo_Nando7.
Bravo_Nando7. Okay.
Yeah.
Stay connected with us. Follow Fernando on social media, on Instagram. If you did relate to his story or felt power coming from it, I sure did. And there will be episodes upcoming every Wednesday and Sunday. Until next time, keep growing, keep leading, and stay inspired doing his will with his power for his glory. Tony out.